My name is Linda Rising. I live in the United States of America. I did not vote for Donald Trump. It's interesting that this talk and a panel that we're going to have tomorrow were planned well before the results of the election, but I think they are appropriate. And in fact, it's a little scary about how appropriate they are. So this is a talk about stereotyping and about judging other people. And these days, I spend a lot of time talking about cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics. And I know that I don't have time to get around and talk everywhere. And so I make the same offer wherever I go, which is, if you think this was an interesting talk, and you can imagine that there would have been someone, either a work colleague, someone in your family, who might have benefited by being here, and you know, I can't come to your house or your church or your workplace. I'm incredibly old. You've probably noticed that already. In fact, you've already begun to stereotype me, haven't you? So you know I'm closer to the end than to the beginning. And that means that I'm going to run out of time at some point to give this talk and many others, so you will have to help me. And to that end, I will give you the PowerPoint slides. I know that you can go on YouTube and see versions of a lot of talks, and I know this conference will have this talk available, but I think you need the PowerPoint, and you can change it, you will own it, and then you can give it so that that message can reach a lot of other people. So there's the most important information that you need is my email address. If I don't get to talk to you, that's a good place to go to ask questions as well. So send me some email and I'll be happy to send you the PowerPoint. This is a picture of the entrance to the Museum of Tolerance in California. And I'm not sure that you can see it very well, but it has two doors. The door on the right, the green door over the top, is labeled unprejudiced. The red door, the door on the left, is labeled prejudiced. Now, it's a little bit of a trick for the mind, because if you go up to the wrong door, you'll find that the doors won't open. Only one set of doors actually leads into the museum, and that's the door on the left. There are cameras outside, and lots of people of various ilk have been seen pounding on the doors saying, "Let me in, let me in." Well, the message is clear that we all have to go through the red door. We all have to go through the door on the left, because unfortunately, we're all prejudiced, we all stereotype. So there's some of the message today is not going to be very enjoyable, and maybe I should begin with an apology. I like to talk about experiments. I believe we don't have enough science in our decisions today. And I especially like to go back and look at the classics. This is an example of a classic experiment. It was done in the 1950s. And it was done in Oklahoma with some young children, some boys who were only 12 years old. And in the experiment, they created two balanced groups, something we don't do in our field. We never say, if we're interested in agile software development or any new technique, why don't we do an experiment, a real experiment, and create two balanced groups, and we'll have one group do agile, we'll have one group do what we've always done, and we'll actually measure the results. So that's exactly what was done here. Two balanced groups, 12-year-old boys. Balanced means they were essentially identical. They were in the same grade in school. They were all white. They were all Protestant. fairly well developed from normal households. Nobody came from anything that was too dysfunctional, although it's interesting this experiment was done in Oklahoma. Little U.S. joke there. Was done in a Boy Scout camp at a place called Robbers Cave. And the lead researcher's last name was Sheriff, so I don't know, Sheriff, Robbers, whether there's any connection. The two groups didn't realize that the other group was there. They were independent of each other, and they were taken out separately in two different buses, ready for phase one. And in phase one, they did what boys do when they go to camp. They went swimming, they went hiking, they cooked food out and made little campfires. They slept outside, they looked at the stars. They just enjoyed being outside. They had a great time, and they began to establish their own identity. Each group came up with a name. One group said, "We are the Rattlers." And the other group said, "We're the Eagles." They created a flag. They wrote songs. They had little slogans. It's kind of what we do in a little group. We begin to establish ourselves. We begin to bond. We begin to form some pretty close attachments to the people we hang out with. Still, they didn't know there was another group in the woods, another group that was going to be a surprise. So toward the end of the first week, the camp counselors, who were really graduate students, research assistants, began to make the other group known. They would get close enough so the two groups could hear each other. They couldn't see each other yet, but they began to be aware that there were other people around. They could hear them off in the distance. They were having fun and enjoying their time at Robbers Cave, and they immediately began to talk about the other group as those people. They immediately began to label, even though they couldn't see them. They began to make racial slurs. In English, that means they called people in that other group niggers. And they said, "I hope those people don't come over to our swimming pool. I hope they don't come over to our campsite. I don't want to see them on our trails, because we know that those people are not people we want to have anything to do with. Those people are not like us." Now, of course, what the two groups didn't know was these were balanced groups. These two groups were essentially identical. Both 12-year-old boys, white, Protestant, having come from very similar backgrounds. They didn't know that. They had already made up their minds that these other people were different. These other people were to be denigrated and avoided at all costs. On the basis of what information? Very little, hardly any. And what's really disturbing in all the research that's been done since this time is that it shows we all do this. We're quick to form little groups, and once we do, we're quick to say, our group is better. We've already seen that. They were joking. But this is serious. We all do this. We all think our group is better. And we begin to immediately talk about the other groups. They're not quite as good as we are. Well, in phase 2, the camp counselors, research assistants actually introduced the two groups to one another, and they began to have some competition. They said, we're going to have some baseball games, we're going to have other sports, and when we do, there's going to be a winner and a loser. We're going to have some prizes. Oh my, we're doing that here too, aren't we? We're voting who's better, who didn't get as many votes. And the winners are always happy and they celebrate. And the losers, well, they know that there must be something wrong with that process because really we are better. We didn't happen to win that game, but we know we're better. So this was intentional. It was meant to fuel that already aggressive nature that the two groups of boys were expressing toward each other. It was to make it worse. Well, the problem is aggression began to emerge from just the interaction of little 12-year-old boys. They began to have wars. After one particular event, why the Rattlers' flag was burned by the Eagles in retaliation. And then later on, the Rattlers launched a night raid and they began to store up rocks, weapons of mass destruction. This was really getting serious. We've got open warfare here between two groups of little boys, children, who are really the same, who have the same cultural background. They're ready to burn their cabins to the ground over a baseball game. Well, now the staff, graduate students were instructed to, let's try to bring them back together. Let's see if we can think of ways to make peace. And the initial efforts were not so successful. They said, well, why don't we play some non-competitive games? We'll bring in some movies. We'll watch those movies together. We'll have fun. We'll have fun together. I don't know how many of you have ever been on those team building exercises where they haul you out into the woods and people take turns jumping blindfold from a picnic table. And that's supposed to build trust. How did that work out for you? Was that successful? So the research is pretty clear that does not work. By the way, in case you didn't know, and in fact, it really made things worse. They were eating together now, watching movies and having fun, and instead, right in the middle, they would have a big food fight. I don't know whether you have food fights in Europe or not, but in the middle of a meal, someone will just yell, "Food fight!" and you'll pick up your mashed potatoes and throw them at the person sitting across from you. That's how it works, in case you want to get that started here. Well, let's leave them throwing mashed potatoes at each other, and let's talk a little bit about what the scientists have to say. That apparently this is a hardwired tendency, and that means that at one time it had survival benefit. A lot of these hardwired biases and tendencies that we have are there for some reason that at a time in our existence meant survival. That at one time we were supposed to gather in small groups. At one time we were supposed to say, everybody who's not in my group is a bad person. And so now we're stuck with this behavior. And the bad news is that we all do it. And we all do it all the time. As soon as we meet anybody, we begin to put them in a little box. And we label that box. And then depending upon how severe that labeling is, we might really pound nails into the box to make sure that that person doesn't escape. I know how that feels because when I came through the border yesterday, there was a gentleman standing there and he was looking at everybody who came through, and I heard him ask questions. How long are you going to be here? And why are you here? Are you here for business? He asked a lot of questions, but not for me. I went up to him, I gave him my passport. He looked at me, and you could tell. He already had that box ready. It said, old woman. He stamped that passport. He didn't ask me any questions. He just waved me on through. Now, I was happy about that on one hand, but on the other hand, I thought, he doesn't think I can do anything. I get that when I sit on an exit row on an airplane. The flight attendant looks at me, and then she kneels down because she's not sure I can see her. She gets down right at eye level, and she speaks very slowly. Do you know you're in an exit row? Yes, I do. I know I'm in an exit. Can you lift 45 pounds? Yes, I can. My suitcase weighs 55 pounds. Do you read English? Yes, I read English. So I know she's done the very same thing. She put me in a box. Incompetent old lady. And she put a couple of nails in the top of that box, and she's not going to let me out. And we all do that. And we do it all day. The survival benefit is that at one time it was important. We had to categorize things. We had to say this is good or this is bad. Food, danger. People who made mistakes in those categories did not survive to produce us. Those who were successful at categorization were the ones who lived long enough to reproduce, and here we are today, fast labelers of everything, especially each other. When Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968, there was a third grade teacher in Iowa who said, "How can I make my children understand what happened here? Because they've never even seen a black person. They have no idea what it feels like, discrimination. They don't know what that means. How can I teach them?" So she came up with the brilliant idea of going into her class the next day to say, "You know, I've read some interesting research, and it told me that blue-eyed children are smarter than brown-eyed children. So I'm going to divide the classroom. I'm going to put the blue-eyed children over here, and I'm going to pretty much spend my time with them. The brown-eyed children, well, they're nice, we know that. But I'll just give them some coloring books. I'll keep them busy, but I know they can't learn as well. Oh, and let's not play together. When we have recess, blue-eyed children, will you stay together? Brown-eyed children, well, you'll have to go play over on the other side. I don't want to see you mixing with each other." And just to be sure, I made these little collars, and I want all the brown-eyed children to wear those. So we all remember the brown-eyed children, they're just not as smart. I know you don't have time to read and look at all the links, not only in my presentation, but in everyone's. But if you do have time to watch this video, those children are now gathering as adults, remembering what that was like. And the brown-eyed children say, I remember when she put that collar around my neck. I felt stupid. I felt stupid. So that's the bad thing about what we do when we put those labels on people. We create the behavior that results from those labels. We make those people behave. We're creating reality by setting expectations. So if we think somebody is stupid or incompetent or too old to matter, then that's what they become. What enormous power. And we do it all day, every day, to everybody we meet. Constantly labeling who's smart and who isn't, who's got it and who doesn't. And that's especially bad if, say, you're a manager. I've never been a manager, but I did read a paper once that said, you know, managers do this kind of labeling long before they have ever seen any evidence of performance. They've already decided who are the good guys and who are the ones who are not going to make it. So I wondered, I know a lot of managers, and I asked a friend of mine, I said, hey, Dave, is this true? I read this research that says managers make up their minds so quickly. I mean, is that possible? And he said, well, Linda, yeah, I guess maybe we do, but we're always right. Well, of course they are. Of course they are. As soon as they've put that label, as soon as they put that collar around your neck, well, that is what you're going to become. That sets that expectation. All right, I've got a video here. I live in Nashville, Tennessee now, so what we would do at this point is we'd offer up a prayer. Oh, God, I hope this video really works. Thank you, God. Thanks to the Carlsberg Brewery who gave me permission to use that film. The first time I showed it in a presentation, a gentleman came up to me afterwards with tears in his eyes, and he said, "You know, I ride a motorcycle." He said, "But I'm afraid to tell the people on my team because I think they think about people who ride motorcycles exactly the way the people in this video thought about people who ride motorcycles. They've already put them in a box, and the label says, 'Bad boy.' We don't want to have anything to do with them. We're very afraid. We're terrified." Well, actually, they looked mean, didn't they? And isn't that enough? If they look mean, surely that means they are mean. Surely that means they are bad people. So we know that's a bad thing about doing that to other people, but here's the really bad news, which is we do that to ourselves. And something I care deeply about is that especially women do this because we know how the world thinks about women. Well, you know, women are nice. We don't mind having them around for some things. But really, when it comes to the hard stuff, you know, math and science, well, you know, women, they're nice people, but they just don't have it. That's just the way it is. And what's really bad is we buy into that. And we do that to ourselves. Not only women, but members of minority groups who are stereotyped in any culture believe, subscribe to. They let that stereotype get in their way. This experiment has been done many times where they've given someone who's in a stereotyped group a really, really difficult test of some sort, math, for instance. And if they're reminded before they take the test, maybe it's just a little box at the beginning that says gender or race or ethnicity. Or maybe it's a reminder, a comment from the person who's giving the test. Well, you know, women don't usually do very well on these advanced math tests. All it takes is a little tiny sliver of a reminder to lower significantly the scores compared to someone who doesn't have a reminder. They do very well, just as well as those who are not in the stereotype group. We can see this in video games when someone is playing the role of an avatar who's a member of a stereotyped group. Their performance is measurably, statistically, significantly less. We buy into that. And we know that that changes our behavior. I heard Michael Hill say this once. I heard him say it a second time after I was familiar with this research, and I finally got it. He said the number one rule for good management, catch them doing something right. Well, okay, now that makes sense. Because now that means it's the job of management to go out and actively seek good performance. And what we know is if that's the expectation, that's what they will see. They will create that in their own teams. It's the same for Norm's prime directive. If you do a retrospective and you begin by saying what was a struggle for us all those years, I honestly believe that everyone was doing the best job he or she could. It was hard. It was hard to step up and say that. But now I know that if you do it and you say that over and over, that sets expectations. You become that team. You become those people who always do their best. And then finally, I discovered this paper. Harvard Business Review is going to charge you for it, but I will send it to you for free. Please don't say anything to Harvard Business Review. But it's a result of experimental studies that show the impact of managers' belief on the performance of employees. If you are a manager or you know a manager, you should definitely read that paper. Oh my goodness, I forgot those children are still back there throwing mashed potatoes and hot dogs at each other. Let's go back and see if we can remedy that. Because what the researchers finally came up with was, let's have some project. And the idea they came up with was, what if something happened to the water supply of the camp? What if we discovered that water was no longer coming in, and now we're all going to have to find the problem? We think it has something to do with the pipe that brings the water into the camp. So we're all going to have to spread out. We're going to have to follow that pipe from the point where it comes into the camp until it delivers water to the kitchen. Let's all get out there and see if we can find what the problem is. And so they did, and they found it, and they realized that they had worked together on something that was affecting all of them, and there are elements to this project that were very effective in bringing these boys together. So they did another project. They said, there's a big tree, it's about ready to fall down, and if it does fall down, it's going to hit the roof of the mess tent. So it's going to take all of us. We're going to put ropes around the tree trunk, and we're going to try to pull it off, but we all have to do it. We all have to work together. It takes all of us. And if we don't, we're going to lose the mess tent. Major impact, something we all care about. And then a truck that brought in supplies got stuck, and they all had to get out and push the truck. After a series of projects like that, where they were all impacted, where they all had to work together, where it took everyone's effort to address the real problem, then there were no rattlers and eagles anymore. It was all about us. We solved these problems. We worked together. They were able to all go home on the bus, and they sang the rattler songs and the eagle songs and all the other songs they knew, and they all lived happily ever after. Yay! Well, Linda, it's a nice story. But these little boys, they were all alike, weren't they? They were all 12-year-olds, Protestant, white. Let's see what would happen. Let's really mix it up. So that experiment has been done over and over and over again, many times with 11 or 12-year-old boys. So I thought these would be a good comparison. Robber's Cave, and now let's look at this one. This was done in Beirut in 1963, and at that time, Lebanon was suffering from a lot of conflict and aggression between two religious groups, the Christians and the Muslims. This experiment involved 8 Christians, 10 Muslims, and these boys had been raised in religious schools as part of a pretty severe religious culture. Religion was real, and it was a driving force in their lives. So it's probably no surprise that they went through phase 1. Sure, they formed identities. They called themselves either the blue ghosts or the red genies. But when things began to get a little testy, and all of a sudden there was severe aggression immediately. 3 genies threatened a ghost with knives. And the counselors said, hold it. This has gone too far. We better break this up. So, see, Linda, look. If you're reading this result and probably making the same mistake that I am, you're probably saying to yourself, well, see, Linda, look, religion, this is really severe. It divides people. Just like in the United States right now, we've got a big divide right down the middle, and we think that's pretty severe. We think there's really no way around that. We're going to probably move to knives next. I have no idea. But you would be wrong, because that's not how the experiment was done at all. The experiment was done by dividing up the boys. We didn't just put the Christians together and the Muslims together. We put half the Christians in one group, the other half in the other, and the same thing for the Muslims. And when the violence broke out, it wasn't on the basis of religion at all. It was the three genies and their ghost victim who were Christians. So the amazing thing about all of this research that was started by Sharif is that, yes, we have this hardwired tendency. We divide people up. But when we're together in a collaborative group, when we work together in small teams, that turns out to be a much more powerful driver for our decisions. We develop those intense loyalties by working together on collaborative projects, and it can, in this case, override religion. Other experiments have shown it can override strong political beliefs, strong nationalistic beliefs. We love to be together in little teams, and we love to work on projects where we get a real result by all contributing. We love collaboration. So we've got these two hardwired tendencies to divide and label, and we've also got this overwhelming need to work together in a small collaborative group. We call it cooperation. The social scientists have another name that we'll talk about. And what we know is it has these elements, that there's got to be a shared goal of some kind, something we all care about. And that throughout an organization, if this is part of a company, all of us have to feel that we're working on some kind of shared goal, something we all care about. And when I started to read the characteristics, I thought, I wonder if this is what we care about in Agile. We get all hung up on a lot of other things that I don't think are especially important. Maybe this is the essence. Maybe it's this working together on things we all care about, where we all feel that we're important. The daily stand-up, what did you do? What did you do? What did you do? My contribution to the group was pairing, where we talk to each other about decisions that we agree on. The short time box iterations, where we say we all agree that we're going to work toward that goal and we're not going to let that deadline slide. And then we take time to look back and learn together. So in the United States especially, we get confused. We think everything is all about liking people and being friends. If you can't go out afterwards and have a beer with them, well, that must mean that we don't get along, and that's not true. So we need to separate those feelings. I've worked on a lot of very successful teams and projects with people I did not like. It's got nothing to do with liking. The element that has to be there that we care about is called respect and trust. So now we'd have to have that debate, wouldn't we? Can you respect and trust somebody you don't like? So these are the elements that are important. Everybody's involved in whatever the project is. Everybody's contribution is important. And I know that I can't do what I have to do unless you do what you have to do. We're all in this together. Out of that evolves that trust and respect. The social scientists call this social interdependence. And they define it this way: team members share common goals. Each person's outcome is affected by the actions of others. I understand I can only make my goal if you make yours. We're all in this together. And of course, what the social scientists have done that we cannot, or we don't seem to be able to do, is they can measure the benefits of this kind of collaboration. And when they do, they see an increase in performance achievement, both at the individual level and at the team level. things become more positive, less dysfunctional. Lots of good attributes, in other words, that can be measured. I don't want to leave you feeling really bad. I know I started out by saying I didn't vote for Donald Trump, and that kind of makes me sick to my stomach right now, so I'm trying to get past that. So this is a story about World War I. And at that time, across Europe, there was a giant trench. Miles and miles and miles across many countries. The trench was pretty long, but it wasn't very wide. And the troops on either side of that trench, as a result, were so close to each other that they could see the other side. And they knew when supplies came in. And they knew when the wounded and the dead were carried out. In other words, they knew when the other side was most vulnerable. And so one of the things that began to happen over the years that troops spent buried in mud and blood and water, peace broke out. They didn't sit down at a table. They didn't sign any documents. They just began to not fire on the other side at critical times. Since I know when your food rations are coming in, I won't fire on you then. Since I know when you're taking your wounded and your dead out, I won't take advantage of that. And you'll begin to see that. And you'll do the same for me, because you know when I am most vulnerable. We begin to collaborate. Well, wait a minute, Linda. I thought the very first thing on that list that you just gave us, I thought it had something to do with shared goals. Well, wait a minute. These are people who are fighting to the death. What is the shared goal here? I think I just want to go home. I want to go home. I don't want to be here. It wasn't my idea to be here. I just want to go home. And they all felt that way. They didn't necessarily have to like each other, but they knew that they shared that very strong feeling. I want to survive. I want to see my family again. I want to go home. So I think a lot of you know that I love animals. Well, actually, you're animals, aren't you? Yeah. And I love research about animals, especially primates. So this last story is about some primate research that was done with two kinds of monkeys. One, the rhesus. The rhesus monkeys are very aggressive. They don't get along at all. If anything happens, they fight. They bite, they scratch, they scream. They don't get along. And there's another species of monkeys called the stump-tails, because they have no tails, so that's an appropriate name. And they are peace-loving, and they love grooming. So some scientists wondered, suppose we took some of these when they were just babies, and we put them together. I wonder what would happen. Would the rhesus just tear the stump-tail babies to shreds? Or would the stump-tail babies somehow, teach the rhesus babies a better way? It was an interesting experiment. And what they noticed was that immediately the stump-tails fell in love with the rhesus monkeys, because the rhesus monkeys have long, fluffy tails. And since the stump-tails love to groom, they start with the tails, and they would groom those tails. And the rhesus monkeys, we don't know what they were thinking, but we can sort of imagine, wow, this is pretty cool. I kind of like having somebody groom my tail. Wouldn't you? The end result of the experiment was the rhesus learned how to groom. They learned a better way. And long after the babies were separated, the rhesus kept those new, I guess you could call it a cultural practice, that they had learned a better way. They had learned not to be so aggressive. They had learned a little bit more about being open. There's a picture of stump-tails grooming. I think it's reason for hope. I hope this hasn't been too bad for you. Are you okay? You're not too depressed? I don't know if we have time for questions, maybe 2 minutes. I'm not sure. If not, thank you. Thanks for listening. Been my pleasure.
Okay, if you have a question, please come forth to the microphone. Okay, there's one question. Yes, we're waiting. Everything's fine. And then I have another question that is coming through the app. Right.
I thought that was a wonderful talk, and actually far more, I thought it was hopeful. So I think it was brilliant. I just wanted to ask one question about what, if anything, do you think is the place of competition between small groups?
Okay, I didn't hear the first part of what you said.
Oh, the first part was just I thought it was a wonderful talk.
Oh,
and it
no,
was
I
actually
heard
full
that
of
part.
hope. Sorry.
I haven't.
So
Thank you.
You talked about groups collaborating together, and you've alluded to competition and the competition between those groups not working out so well. I just wonder what do you think is the role, or is there a place for competition in our endeavors?
I don't think you can get rid of it. I think it's definitely a part of how we are. At least Western society is very competitive, and so it's not going to disappear overnight. And it's just the same way with the stereotyping. There's nothing we can do about that. We're stuck with it. What we can do is be aware of the penalties of that. For instance, I once worked with a company, in fact, just recently doing a retrospective, and we spent half a day on T-shirts. Because part of the people on the team got a T-shirt for being on the team, and the other people did not. So they were angry at not being included. So I think we have to be aware of when we do anything on a team, is that going to set up some kind of rivalry? Because it can happen like that. In many of these experiments, they've shown that people will bond together and begin then to fight with other teams on the basis of something as little as a T-shirt, or where your social security number lies, or whether you overestimated or underestimated jelly beans in a jar. I mean, we're just ready to go. So we have to be aware of that, and we have to be aware when we're running organizations that if a decision is something that's going to set people against each other, it will. Oh, I don't know, is that not too hopeful, is that?
I think the most important thing is that you're saying to be aware of it, and then if you're aware of it, then you can engage with it.
Yes, so. is being aware, and also that behavior drives attitude. When we make those decisions about other people, and we put them in the box, and we put the nail in the top of the box, we think it's because they have some set of characteristics. Well, those people are, when really we're making that up. The characteristics we attribute to the people in the box are things we created. And that the people in the box are not either homogeneous, but many of them are closer to us than they are to each other. And so we've also got to realize that when we ascribe those characteristics to those people, that we are creating that. That list is something our brain created. We made it up. Actually, our brain is creating about most of reality that we see anyway. So that's another talk. Yeah, indeed. Yes.
There's one question through the app, which says, How can we teach ourselves to not frame stereotypes regarding us? Being a woman in tech industry, how can I abolish these prejudices that I will do worse than men?
Okay, so you can't. These are hardwired tendencies. There is absolutely nothing you can do about it. And the illusion that you can walk out of here now and say, oh, well, Linda told me everything there is to know about stereotyping. That's what other people do. No, I feel like I said that many times, is we all do this, and we do it to everybody. You're going to spend 2 days now talking to each other, and while you're doing it, labeling them, categorizing them, putting them in boxes. You can't help it. It's what you do. But maybe you'll be a little aware of it. Maybe you'll think about what you're thinking. That's not enough, but it's a start. So realizing how stuck we are and that we all do it. Even people who are graduate students who study this full-time for a living, people who teach it, say when they are examined for stereotype biases, they are just as severe as those of us who are on the outside, who don't study it 24/7. We're stuck with it. There's nothing you can do about it. And maybe that should raise awareness even more. Sorry. And Donald Trump is going to be in the White House for 4 more years, too, so you're stuck with it. God help us. Are we done?
Yes, thank you
We're
very
done.
much, Linda.
Thank you.